A wise old owl sat in the oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. So let's be like that wise old bird. Now, in the Middle Ages, in Central Asia, there lived a tribe called the Mongols. Now, these people were a fierce warrior tribe, and they were very similar to the Huns. Now, their king, Janiberg, had taken a group of Mongols across Asia, and they happened to be camped outside of a town called Kaffa on the Black Sea. Now, they were in conflict with the people of Kaffa, and so they spent time fighting them. They couldn't get in, but they kept fighting for a whole year. Now, at the end of this year, they began to get sick, and they knew what it was. It was the plague. They started getting chills, they started getting fevers, they started feeling sick like they were going to throw up, and they even started getting black boils or lumps on their bodies. The Mongols knew that they were never going to win in this state, and so King Janiberg decided to retreat. But before he left, they loaded up catapults with their dead soldiers, and they flung them over the walls of Kaffa. The Black Plague had entered the city. Now, it ran through that city, but before it got too bad, some people got on ships and left through the Black Sea out into the Mediterranean. Now, these boats were trading boats, and so they were on their way with different goods. One of these boats stopped in Constantinople, and there, when they unloaded, infected people in Constantinople. And within a year, half of the people of Constantinople died. Now, another boat had rowed through the Black Sea all the way over to Sicily, the island just off of Italy. And again, the Black Plague was infected to these people. And over half of the island's people died. Now, some of them, as soon as they had seen what was happening and that so many people were getting sick, fled to the mainland of Italy, trying to escape from this. They thought if they got away from the infected, sick people, they would be okay. But it wasn't so. Some of them had it, and they just didn't know it yet. And so the Black Plague spread into Italy, and within a year, half of Italy's population had died. Now, other boats had went other places. There was one in Tunis in North Africa, and one that landed in Marseille in France. And the same thing happened in all of these places. People didn't know what was happening. They saw this and they were scared because they didn't know how to stop it. Once somebody was sick, almost always they died. Now, as this Black Plague of death was spreading over the European continent, other things were happening too. Mount Etna in Italy erupted. There were huge storms and plagues of locusts that were going through France, taking away almost all of their crops. There were floods on the Rhine River that were destroying towns all the way down on its banks. There were earthquakes in Italy, rocking small towns and collapsing all of their buildings. Now, the people of this time didn't know what was happening. They were so scared by all these events. And if we remember, most of the people that were in Europe were Christian at this time. Now, in the Bible, there are stories of an apocalypse where the world gets destroyed, and there are floods. There are locusts, there is disease. And so people were scared. They thought that the apocalypse, the end of the world, was coming. All of these things were happening all about the same time, and it was very frightening. Now, when people get scared, they try to figure out what to do. Some of them decided that they must repent all of their sins and give up all of their earthly goods. So they were dropping off and donating all of their things and just going to sit outside monasteries, and they were praying that they would be for forgiveness and that they would not be taken by this plague. Some people decided that somebody else was to blame, that there was somebody that had actually caused this. And so the Christians decided, or some of them, said that the Jews must be to blame for this, the Jewish people. There was even a theory that maybe some Jewish people concocted this disease and was carrying it with them in little bags and distributing it to kill off the Christians. And so that created even more fear. Now, once that rumor got spread, a lot of people were persecuted. The Jewish people were captured, they were made to leave towns, and many of them were even killed because of this. If we remember back, these Christians had once been persecuted by the Romans, and now they were doing the same thing to the Jewish people. Now, the Black Plague was not curable at this time. It went through all of Europe, parts of northern Africa, parts of Asia, and eventually it calmed down. Eventually it stopped. Now, people didn't know how it started. They actually thought that maybe it came from miasma, and they said that miasma were bad air, bad fumes in the air. So they thought that if somebody was dead or there was rotten smells, the smell is what was making you sick. And so oftentimes they would, if somebody was sick, they would close the door, they would make a mark on the door, and then nobody could go in or out to keep those smells inside. People wore masks or suits that would try to keep this smell away from them, and some of the masks had these long beaks on them, and they had good smelling things inside them to try to block the bad smells from getting into their airways. Now, other things that people did to stop getting sick was to either go away from people who were sick, or some places started to say if a ship came into shore, they would have to wait on that ship for a while to make sure that they weren't sick and were not going to bring it to that town. So it was kind of like a small quarantine on your ship, or maybe you'd be quarantined in your house in order to make sure that you weren't sick before you went around to other people. So just like today, people in the past used quarantine to stop the spreads of diseases. Now, today we know how different viruses and bacteria are spread. Scientists have looked back and discovered that it was actually bites from fleas that would give people this disease. And the fleas lived on rats. The rats had the disease. And then the flea would bite the rat. The flea would bite the person. And then they would get it. Now, the Black Plague didn't just affect people. It affected some animals in a bad way too. So cows, sheep, pigs, chickens, they also could get this and die. And so there was actually a shortage of wool during this time because so many sheep had died. Now today, since we know often how diseases are spread, we can stop them with different things. We can know that we should wash our hands and that we shouldn't cough on people, that we should kind of keep to ourselves when we are sick. We also have medicines. And truthfully, today, the bubonic plague is still in this world. You still could get it. But if you take antibiotics, it can cure you and you won't die from that disease. But it wasn't something that they had back in medieval times. Now, the other thing is that this bubonic plague, it came back. It started, it ravaged Europe, it went away for a while, and then it came again, at least 2 more times. Now, as people learned more about it, they were better at keeping themselves safe, and so the first one was the worst, and then the others were not as bad, but it still definitely caused millions of deaths for people. The Black Plague was the worst of all of the plagues of all times. Now, when it really had rolled through, Europe had to rebuild because there were so many people that had died. There was nobody there to grow food anymore. And so people were struggling to survive by finding food, and there was businesses out of business. So they spent time rebuilding. But people who had been poorer during this time actually found a lot of opportunity. If you can imagine, if half of your family or almost all of your family dies, you may inherit land, you may inherit wealth. And so somebody who was very poor all of a sudden could be rich in land and animals and money. And so now they had a chance to better their life. Maybe they were living on a farm and wanted to move to the city and start a business. And now that they had that land, they could rent it. They could make money off of the crops. And so they had more opportunities. So this time of darkness and death led to kind of a resurgence of people finding good things. And this plague, after people took time to rebuild, led into a time of light and learning, a rebirth of all things educational and innovation, and that is called the Renaissance. And next year, we will learn all about the Renaissance.